So I don't have too much experience when it comes to From Software games. I played Dark Souls 1, then I got pretty far in Dark Souls 2 but never finished it, and skipped out on Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and didn't bother with Demon Souls as I think it was only for the PlayStation 3, and I never got one. But I was strangely excited for Sekiro. There was something about the game and its style that reeled me in, and since From games have such a passionate community behind them, I knew this was something that I had to play. And I'm in no way disappointed. This game has exceeded my expectations in almost every way. Now, I'll be honest, I went into this game expecting to be frustrated all the time, and I expected to just die over and over to cheap tricks and artificial difficulty, but that never happened. And there's something satisfying about the combat in this game. It's challenging and rewards you for knowing what to do and when to do it. And with how the game basically promotes aggression with the posture system, it leads to some of the most tense and exciting battles I've had in a very long time in a video game. And I'm not just talking about the amazing boss battles. The pacing of the game ensures that you're never bored, even when you're fighting weaker mob type enemies. The levels make sure that most of the fights are still somewhat challenging by throwing in enemies with rifles and ranged attacks, the tanky ogres, dogs, regular guards, and so on. And From sort of stuffs these areas with all these enemy types so that you can't just breeze in there and start spamming attacks. And with the stealth mechanics, it makes these fights a bit more manageable. Actually, the stealth makes a lot of the fights, including mini bosses, a bit more manageable. The stealth isn't too deep or complex, it's actually really simple, but it allows you to thin the herd, and then you tack on the grappling and you can take out entire sections without really fighting anyone, as you can just grapple away or sprint away, as the enemies won't chase you far and forget about you after a short while. And this really takes the edge off of a few sections. It allows you to escape and heal, or come back to take out another few enemies, or just run off to another part of the map, as this game allows you to branch off in quite a few ways. When the enemies aren't aware of your presence, they're basically clueless. It feels like they see in a really tight cone and they can't see too far, so there's not a lot of challenge to stealthing around. Sometimes they can sense you when you've hit someone with a death blow and aggro onto you when you're sure that there was no way they'd see or hear you. But then sometimes you can have a full-on battle with 3 enemies about 20 feet away from them and they would be completely oblivious. It's not that big of a deal to me, it's just something that was sort of odd. One thing I do love about the stealth is that there are some sections that you can just completely ignore by sneaking through some tall grass or hiding under some wooden walkways or skittering across a rooftop. And this played a huge part in keeping me cool after losing to a certain mini boss like 25 times in a row, as I could just run from the spawn point, the idol, all the way to the boss without fighting the same enemies each time I died. Speaking of dying, being allowed to die twice before being thrown back to an idol is really helpful. It allows you to get those last few hits in on a boss if you were close to defeating them, and helps you deal with bosses that have multiple stages, or allows you to escape back to an idol and rest if you don't want to really die and spread more Dragonrot. Now, personally, I didn't really care for Dragonrot and how it affected the story, but I know that there are some people who do, and this could make your experience a bit less enjoyable, as it could cut off some of the content in the game and make you play very timidly. But if you don't care for it, then it's not that big of a deal. When you do die, you lose half of your XP and money earned. Again, I never really cared too much for the stuff when I lost it, as if you really need to, you can just go farm in some spots to get the upgrades you want. And money pouches were pretty easy to find, so when I did need to buy something that I really wanted, like a gourd seed to increase the amount of healing uses I had, I could just sell the pouches I found while scavenging the world and then buy them when I needed to. The boss fights in this game are all challenging. Some are much more difficult than others, but even so, I never really felt cheated. There's only one boss I've defeated without dying to, and I've always felt like dying was my fault for either timing something wrong or getting too greedy. You get used to the enemy's attacks after a few tries, and with resurrections by your side, it can make learning the bosses a bit easier. They also make the prosthetics more interesting to use, as some bosses have weaknesses that can be exploited by using the different tools Sekiro's arm has, with some bosses even having secret uses that you can't pick up on by eavesdropping or anything like that. And I think that's just a nice touch from the devs. But some bosses can be completely cheesed, completely destroyed with the right combination of tools and items. Another thing I like is that you can defeat the bosses by either chipping away at their health and landing a death blow, or destroying their posture and landing a death blow. It allows you to play aggressively if you'd like, but if you wish to play more passively and only attack when you're guaranteed damage, while avoiding all of the perilous attacks, you can do that too. The boss fights are easily my favorite part of Sekiro. They were difficult but fair, and there's a bunch of them, so if you enjoy boss fights, you'll have a good time here. There's some light RPG-ish elements here, with a few skill trees you can dive down. Most of the skills that had some sort of activation, like an attack or something, I didn't use too often. I just found one that I liked and I stuck with it. I was more interested in the passives. There's some that are just extremely good and I feel are almost mandatory, like the one that heals you a bit on death blow or the Makiri counter, which just really is one of the most useful skills in the game. There's also Sekiro's prosthetic arm, which has a few different items you can attach to it along with your grappling hook, which have skills that can be upgraded. There are also items that you find throughout the world and can use in various ways, like the oil, which douses enemies in oil to light them on fire with your prosthetic, or pellets, which are healing items that heal you tick by tick. There are quite a few items in the game that are used situationally, and there are some that buff you in certain ways, but if you're like me, you'll end up only using your healing gourd and pellets because you're not sure when you're actually going to need the items and don't want to waste them, so you just hold on to them, and before you know it, the game is over. The movement is something I don't see too many people talk about, but it's not as clunky as I thought it would be. The controls are responsive and the movement is sort of snappy. You also move around the map pretty fast while sprinting. I really like it. You can swim, grapple, wall jump, wall climb, all this stuff, and it allows you to get around the map in a few ways. There are a few challenging spots in the game that you can just completely run by, not even sneaking, just sprinting on through, and that's not a bad thing at all to me, as sometimes I really just don't want to fight the same enemies over and over again. The other great thing that I really loved about the game is its style and design. The world's design is really good, especially as you get further on in the game, and the level design is great as to be expected. The map isn't necessarily huge, it's not an open world, but it's not a straightforward path either. It allows you to branch off in areas, and there's a lot of verticality in some parts of the map, allowing you to go from the tops of buildings and peaks all the way down underwater at a point. But the graphics don't really stand toe-to-toe with some of the other games that have been released recently, like Devil May Cry. Sometimes the game looks a bit old and the frame rate can sometimes drop even in areas that aren't packed. The worst I've had it was after you get ambushed by a certain flying enemy. The game was basically moving in slow motion for a bit and was pretty choppy, but other than a few sections, I personally didn't have too many problems with it. The bosses are all well designed and I like that. They're all somewhat intimidating, even the mini bosses. Some are a little plain, like the ones that look like upscaled samurai generals, but others can really leave you backing into a corner with their size and speed or aggressive attack patterns, especially on your first attempt. But my favorite thing about the presentation is easily the audio. When you're fighting against another enemy or boss with a sword, the game just sounds so amazing with how the metal clangs off of each other as you block, deflect, and strike back, and it really adds to the satisfying back and forth that the battles have, which are punctuated by the Tenchu style death blows. I think the only place where the audio fell a bit short was in the score. Nothing really stuck with me, and I feel like in a game like this where you can end up in the same spot for a while, the soundtrack needs to get you involved rather than just fading away into the background. And the score for the most part is serviceable. None of it sounds bad, but some of it feels a bit generic and samey. Other than that though, the world does sound good and the combat sounds absolutely amazing. The voice acting is pretty good in both English and Japanese. I didn't listen to it in any other languages, but for those two, I think it did a pretty good job. Overall, Sekiro is just a really good game, and now I'm not sure what my favorite game of the month is, as now there's 3 really good games from March that I can think of right off the top of my head. Even if you're not a big Souls fan or From Software fan, I think that there's still something you can get from this game, as I'm not a huge fan of From games myself. As I've said, it's challenging, but it's not grueling. It's fairly manageable so far. I should finish the game the next time I play, and I don't even think I've fought every boss, as some of them are optional it seems, so I have to go back and fight some. I really enjoy playing it, and while it does have a few slip-ups, I think it's something that you should definitely try if you're interested. The combat is tight, the game runs well most of the time, and this game has some of the most satisfying fights that you'll have for a while, I believe. Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. I tried to keep it brief, straight to the point, and tried to keep the gameplay and what I talked about somewhat spoiler free, and tried to only show really early game stuff, as some people do care about the story and want to experience the boss fights for themselves. As usual though, I do want to hear what you guys think, so feel free to talk to me down in the comments and tell me how you feel about the game. I'm not sure how replayable it'll be. I'm not sure if I'll play it again when I'm done. I doubt it, since there's no multiplayer and there's really not a lot of builds you can make or anything, so New Game Plus is about it if you're into that. As always though, if you like the video, feel free to like something new, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.